Hi, and welcome back to the Ministry Path podcast, where we're finding mentors and meaningful practices along the ministry path. Today, we're going to be talking about echo chambers. It's amazing that with the accessibility of social media, we feel or we should be more connected. But as it turns out, we're finding that many times the algorithms keep us in separate echo chambers where we're listening to things and hearing things that we like and that we pursue, but eventually we end up separated from other people who tend to like different things or who tend to engage with different things. And it's not just in social media, even in the church can often become an echo chamber where we begin to talk to ourselves. And there are segments of the population, even people we're supposed to be reaching, that we often lose sight of. And so today we're going to be asking, how do we break those cycles to become more engaging and more connected to the people that we ought to be connecting with? And so today we have a very, very special guest that I'd like to introduce to you, someone who's from the Pacific Northwest, Kaleb Eisele, who is the communications director of the Oregon Conference. And he's a very, very meaningful and thoughtful podcaster, someone who's been engaging people in such meaningful ways. So Kaleb, welcome. Welcome to the Ministry Path podcast.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
And it's been amazing getting to know you. You and I kind of met at we connected socially online, but we met at a wedding for my
Yep.
niece and Emily, who we just got a shout out to because we love her so much. But
Yep.
it turns out that you know Emily, right?
I do. Yeah, we're technically related now.
Okay, tell us.
Sister-in-law.
She's your sister-in-law. And so I had no idea. I show up to the wedding, which I was so blessed to officiate, and there you were. And it was amazing.
Yep.
I had no idea that you were related to her. And so we started to connect. And then eventually I learned about just some of the conversations that you've been having with people who have been disconnected with the church. And rather than just speaking to ourselves kind of in echo chambers, I'm just so impressed with the way that you've been able to continue to connect or to uniquely identify people who have been disconnected from the church, and then to try to probe and to try to respectfully ask questions about what was their experience in the church, and maybe even ask what is it that drove them away from the church. And somehow you've been able to connect and to learn a lot about their experiences, and you're trying to share what those experiences are. Am I getting it right? Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so Bridges Over Walls is kind of one of the latest projects that I've worked on. And really the point of the podcast is to explore pain and hardship that Christians and Christianity have created for other people. So this is a podcast where we focus on accountability for ourselves. This is a podcast where we focus on, hey, what is something, or what are pieces of our culture, or what is some actions and aspects of this that are not like Jesus? What are some ways that we're really kind of, causing the problems that we're seeking out to kind of solve? How are we contributing to the problem of people dropping off, of people not wanting to be around us, of people not trusting us in our communities? Very often when you go into church, all of the blame for people not being there, not participating, any of that, it goes on everyone else. And we flip that on its head in this podcast where we say, okay, what are the things that we're doing that cause this situation? So it's very outside in. It's a very humbling experience sometimes, because sometimes it's stuff that I do. Sometimes it's stuff that I've been part of, or I still kind of promote, or whatever. But it's an honest look at, how, if we're really serious about being like Jesus, if we're really serious about the way that he lived in his community and living that way, how can we do that? And so, episode by episode, some episodes are, we have things on like, what's it like when you lose a parent and you walk into church and you hear, well, God has a plan, it'll all be okay. Maybe this is for a reason, right? We have episodes on, people who grew up in the church for years and years, were up on stage singing, preaching, whatever, and now want nothing to do with it and can't stand the thought of stepping in the door. We have episodes on racial relations and gender relations and all of those complicated dynamics and the history that's brought us to where we are now. And, a lot of those things don't have easy answers, but if we care about them, you have to start with listening to the people who have been harmed and the people who do not currently trust us. And so that's what we do.
That's amazing. It's not always easy to do in the church, because if they're not there, it's hard to have those conversations. And so it takes a little bit of intention. Now, it is, you mentioned something that was interesting. Sometimes we look at statistics of decline in the church. Sometimes we look at, sometimes all we have to do is look around on Saturday morning and see, wow, since the pandemic especially, there's people missing. And we wonder, a lot of pastors and ministry leaders are wondering, where did people go? Why, was it the pandemic that just kind of was the ultimate kind of permissive environment that allowed people to say, okay, now's the time to kind of disconnect? And sometimes it's hard to find or to have conversations with people who've disconnected. But as we look at statistics and we look at trends, it's very easy to say, oh, this is just postmodernism, or it's like meta postmodernism, or there are reasons, the world is becoming, more secular, and to utilize those things as the reasons why people aren't continuing in their faith journey or continuing to be part of this community. But what you're saying is that you're taking a step further and saying, okay, is there something that we did? Is there something that we have contributed to this, to these statistics? It sounds like you're trying to address it at that level.
Absolutely. I think of two major Bible stories just about every day. I think about the story of Abraham with Sodom and Gomorrah, and I think about the story of Jonah. In both situations, you have men who were looking out at a big population of people and really could see the problems with those places and people very clearly, but their reactions to them were so different. When Abraham looks at Sodom and Gomorrah, God himself tells him, these people are too wicked. And Abraham says, wait, let me try, right? I care about them. I can't stand the thought of somebody not having a chance, right? Of not having the chance to change, to get to know you, to, what if we miss somebody, right? In the story of Jonah, the people weren't good enough for Jonah. The people actually change. The people actually do what God asks. And Jonah's upset about it because it doesn't look the way that he wants it to. And I think we have those two models to consider now as a church. When we look at young people, when we look at secular society, when we look at, I live in Portland, Oregon, one of the most secular cities in the US. When we look at Portland, are we having that attitude of, I want to be part of the people's lives here. I want to, I care. I want to be involved. I want to try every last thing that I possibly can to establish this connection. Or am I the person complaining because the person's hair is dyed weird, or they're too loud, or their kids are crying, or they swore, or, they don't watch what I want them to watch, or they don't show up at the time I want them to show up, or whatever.
They wore the wrong thing to church, right?
Yeah. Which archetype do you want to be? And to me, we get one example in the Bible of God in human form, what God would be like if he was here on earth, and that's Jesus. And Jesus spends his time in the community, in people's houses, eating with them, listening to them, right? He's involved with their life and he's trusted. And I just don't think that's who we are. I think that's who we should be and who I want the church to become and what I'll give my whole life to help us become. But that's not what I see currently. And so I think the challenge for us is to become that.
Yeah. To have the heart of Jesus, to actually seek and to find people where they are. So in some of the podcasts that I've heard, you've shared a little bit about your story. It sounds like this concept of disconnected is very personal to you. What was your faith journey like, and then what brought you to where you are today?
I was as Adventist a kid as you can find. 4 generations back, both sides of the family, went to the same Adventist high school in Cicero, Indiana. I grew up with Ellen White, read as much or more than the Bible. Grew up in a very kind of fear-based religious environment and approach to Adventism. But I mean, I was an adventurer. I was a pathfinder. I preached. I sang special music. I was in handbells. I went on mission trips. All of the opportunities for spiritual activities, I had worship multiple times a day: chapel, morning worship in classes, Sabbath worship, Sabbath evening, Vespers, everything. And still, when I hit adulthood, the disconnect between what I saw in the character of Jesus and what I saw in the church was so wide that I didn't think that the church was the way I would find God. And in so many of my friends, a lot of people, when they go about this conversation, they're coming from the position of, I'm part of this Adventist group, this church-going group, and I'm trying to go out and find the people who aren't here. My core community is all the people who grew up and left. The people I love most in the world, the people I trust with my life, with my family, who would come get me if there was an accident, the majority of those people will not be in church on a Saturday morning. And so I carry both the people I grew up with and all of the stories of the people that I've interviewed for podcasts and projects. I carry thousands, literally thousands of people's stories of how this has worked for them. And so it's from that place that I go about this work, is that place of knowing the struggles that are going on and why, and knowing that a lot of the people that aren't in church, it's not because they're bad people, and it's not because they don't care about Jesus, and it's not because they don't want something better. It's that they didn't find it in church.
Wow.
And so, yeah. So yes, short version is, I left the church in my early 20s. I'd been in a family where there was divorce, there was, abuse in my home life. There was several abuse cases in my academy that I grew up in. I mean, just a lot of stuff falling apart, and moved to a new state, tried to get involved there. Very disappointing situation. Did not feel that I could be part of that community, didn't feel seen or heard as a young person. And honestly, I didn't feel like the church cared about the neighbors next door. And I felt like it was impossible to get them to. I felt like all they cared about was this ritual programming, another sermon about Revelation, another, song service, another, just this repeated cycle over and over and over. And yet we were in a low income neighborhood, and what were they doing for childcare? What were they doing to alleviate the burden of the people around them? I felt like nothing. So that led me out. Spent a couple years out. I found wonderful groups in my community doing homeless ministry, doing, all kinds of humanitarian and environmental work that I felt like was closer to what I saw in Jesus' life. And they weren't religious at all. And so this disparity between what I saw in Jesus and what I saw in the church was something that drove me out of the church. Eventually, I found people who showed me Jesus in real time, and I was able to come back and get really involved. But I still carry all of that knowledge and all of those experiences with me when I go about church work now.
So, and probing a little bit deeply, it sounds like you had every reason in your experience with the churches that you were a part of and the Christians that you saw, you had every reason to turn your back and say, all right, that was church. That was interesting childhood experience. And I didn't really see Jesus reflected, and certainly to the degree that was faithful to the Bible. You had every reason to say, all right, I'm done with this. But here you are, you're back in the church. You're trying to contribute to the conversation of this disconnectedness that exists. And you reference it a little bit. How did it actually happen? How did you see Jesus in the church?
Yeah. My parents divorced when I was 6 years old. And I remember my mom going from Friday night, we vacuumed the house, baked bread. I mean, listened to Bible story records. Just a very if you imagine the perfect Sabbath evening, the preparation day before sundown, that's us. Very traditional mindset. And I saw her go from that to within months of the divorce saying I don't believe in God anymore. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I grow up with kind of this jarring change at 6 years old. And I stay living with my dad and my stepmom. I go through Adventist school, and, she doesn't participate in religion for most of my life into my adult life. But there was a shift in my mid-20s. My wife and I had moved down there to South Carolina, which is several states south of where I grew up. And I saw her and my stepdad go through a real soul searching in their, I want to say 40s and 50s, and they got involved in this little church, and that church had about 12 members, hadn't had a baptism in years and years and years, very few young people, at least consistently. And they really took ownership of their spiritual experience. And one of the wonderful things that they did was they started asking their kids about their experiences, including me and my wife. And a lot of times I would drive up on Sabbaths when I was outside of the church. I lived about an hour and a half south of them going to school. And I'd be doing laundry, and they'd get home from church, and we'd just talk about, their experience. And they would ask, what can this church do to reach somebody like you? What would make you want to come back, And those conversations in the living room, through those kind of the pastor there learned about me. And he started asking, I met him a couple times, and he was like, hey, can I take you out to lunch sometime? And so in my brain, I'm like, oh, great. Church with no young people. They just know my age, and they want me to be involved. But what was so cool is he never did that. I never got the salesman vibe from him. He would show up in my life, contribute in real ways, ask real questions that he could take back to the church and do something about. But never pressured me to come back. Never said, hey, you have to be there. We really need you there. Or God wants you there. None of that. It was, how can I come to you? How can I be involved in your life? How can I be a trusted and, involved person for you, whether you come to the building or not? And over, when I expected him to have a sales pitch, he never did. Over and over, he erred on the side of me. And that was exactly the opposite of what I had experienced before. Over and over, people were not invested in. They were not safe. They were not wanted outside of the church walls. And so to see that, and to see the example of my mom and my stepdad really just getting involved there, I ended up coming to board meetings for this church before I was a member there. They would invite me and ask my opinion. And eventually they're like, hey, if you ever wanted to share a message or anything, we would welcome it. And I'm like, hey, you're not going to like it. You're
going to be honest.
I'm going to be really honest. And they let me do that. They welcomed it. And, so I ended up in this church with largely just senior citizens and me and my mom and stepdad, and got really involved there because their attitude was, we don't have to agree with you, but we want your voice. And I didn't know that was possible. At the time and place that I was, I hadn't seen examples of that. And so for me, it opened this whole door of being involved doesn't mean I have to lose all of my opinions, all of my personality, and become this uniform cookie cutter, kid to just plug in somewhere. I can bring myself and my questions and the things I'm passionate about and my concerns all into this. And that's a good thing. And, it's the most mind-blowing thing. And so, it was this beautiful start to re-engaging with the church. And I think the other thing, I don't blame anybody who's gone through a rough time and decided to disconnect. But for me, I knew that people listened when I talked. And that was something that wasn't true for so many people in my life.
Mm.
That whatever it was, whether it's the way my personality, the way I communicate, whatever it was, people were willing to consider my point of view in a way that wasn't true for my friends.
Mm.
And so I had a privilege in Adventism. I had my voice carried in a way that I felt, I can actually do something here. I can influence things here. I can affect some kind of change, even if it's not as fast as I want.
Mm.
And then I started thinking, for the kid growing up that's in high school like I was, for the kid growing up that's going through, the family's divorce like I did, for the kid growing up in the Adventist church now, who's going to make that story different?
Mm. Mm.
If I disconnect, if I completely disconnect, who's left? It's the people who can tolerate what's going on. It's the people who, at some level, can approve of what's going on. If you have no counterpoints in the church, if you have no one willing to say, hey, maybe we're wrong, what creates that change? Because it's not people just leaving and yelling about it. And it's not people who are staying and not willing to change. It's those in-betweens where they're willing to be honest, but not to tear down the church, but to redeem the church, to bring it forward, to bring it back closer to Jesus. It's that prophetic voice that we see, maybe not direct messages from God, but that willingness to speak truth to power, regardless of the ramifications of that. And, even today, I have to be willing to lose my job. And there's just not that many people that are willing to kind of take that position with the church where you want it to be better. You're willing to be part of making it better. And, you genuinely love it too.
Mm-hmm.
And you see the good, and you help grow the good.
But you're being willing to ask the tough questions and to push back a little bit when we're not reflecting Christ in that way. Man, what a powerful story. It sounds to me like when that little church began to take interest in you, like genuine interest. It's such a simple thing, but it had such a profound impact on you, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's many times we think, wow, it's like our church doesn't have like, the amazing praise band or the amazing choir, and it doesn't have all the lights. We don't have all this, we don't have a stage manager and a smoke machine and all that stuff. But
sure.
But that little church was able to do something in your life. Somebody who had completely disconnected, and they were able to bring you back just by taking interest in you. You think that's powerful enough to do that?
Well, so I've condensed a lot there. It's the intentionality. So I was flat broke. I got married. My wife and I were 19 and 20 years old when we got married.
Okay.
Very, very young. We had our cars that we drove broke down all the time. I'm getting paid basically minimum wage at most of my jobs, trying to go back to school. And so, the church members did a lot in just being involved in my life in meaningful ways. I remember an older couple where, I told them like, hey, I can't come to this church thing. I have to work because I can barely pay my bills, And they're like, if you ever need some work, you can come by Sunday. We have some boxes we need taken down. We've got some work in our garden and everything. And so it's like, okay, yeah, I do need work. So I went there and I remember working with them in their garden. And when it came to the end of the day, they handed me a check that was significantly more than we had agreed on.
Wow.
And
they saw a need. They saw a need, and they started to help you address it.
I was downplaying my financial situation to them. My need was much greater than they would have known. But it was moments like that where I felt like they went the extra mile, if you asked about our theology, if you asked about our views on politics, night and day different, but their involvement in my life was real. When I said, hey, this church, you have to have some kind of social media presence, like this is the front door that people use these days. They said, well, we don't really know what you're talking about, but let's buy the church a computer and let's give you the go ahead and make one. And we won't even see it. We're not even on there, but we trust you.
Wow.
And so just over and over these moments, it was that intentionality. And when you're talking about the churches with the smoke machines and the lights and the cool youth programs, kids are leaving those churches too. And so it's really, have the staff and the community there taking that intentional time to meet for ice cream. Have they taken the intentional time to show up at graduation? Have they taken the intentional time to, put in a good word at a job somewhere? It's those things, I think, that build trust a lot better than just having the right programming or saying the right thing or knowing the right, cool trend or whatever it is. It's, does this person really want to be around you? And if so, are you a trusted person, even if they chose tomorrow to never show up in church again? Are you someone that they would want to talk to?
Right.
Is someone they would call if they needed help?
Yeah, there's this saying by a media strategist called Seth Godin who says that we don't change markets or populations, we change people one person at a time, right? And that's not even he's not even speaking in terms of religious or outreach or evangelism. That's just like social media and markets, but it's very applicable to what we're talking about. It's like somebody taking interest in you, like genuine interest, and not just inviting people, and not just inviting you to the church and to say, all right, now that you're in the church, you just have to act and think and do what we do. But they accepted you just for who you were. They're trying to understand you and trying to take your suggestions, doing all these things that really resonated with you. So it sounds like there were multiple things that were happening, but ultimately, did they love you back into the church?
Yeah, but it wasn't fluffy buzzword love. It was gritty, on your feet, involved, inconveniencing themselves on my behalf love.
Wow.
If that's what you mean by loving me back into the church, absolutely.
Wow. And there's certainly I mean, it's amazing. I'm sure that they must be very proud of having to contribute to your spiritual walk. So now we fast forward, and obviously we don't have talk. We're going to have you come back and tell us all the in between. But I want to get to the part where you are now, and I know that there were multiple steps, but you are now the communications director for a Seventh-day Adventist conference, right? So
I know.
You have
I'm as surprised as you are.
It's amazing. We'll get into did they ever expect for you to do something like that? But
no.
But you're contributing to this, not just communicating important information and all that, but now you're actually trying to help us and trying to help ministry leaders understand, hey, what does it actually take? Because different people have different stories and different backgrounds. So as you've interviewed people who've disconnected from the church, what has surprised you the most about some of those conversations?
One of the most surprising things is how simple their asks are. When we have these big seminars about people leaving the church or youth and young adult, culture and things like that, it turns into this very academic, well, they're exposed to this and that makes them think this, and they have trends like this and they care about this, but they don't care about this. And really, I think it's that human to human connection, but it's just that, we really need every church member being involved with multiple other lives. One pastor, you only have a certain capacity in your life for a certain number of people to be really invested, right? And I think it's the rarity of people that want to do that work that's really our problem.
Mm.
So, I'm most surprised by the lack of interest in doing that work. Um, I feel like so much of the church, they want to show up for their pet thing. If it's Pathfinders, great. If it's the Sabbath sermon, if it's your Sabbath school class, if it's your stop smoking seminar or health thing, whatever it is, you're kind of all about that. But when you get asked to say like, okay, that's actually secondary, all those things are supposed to serve you being involved with other people. You know, suddenly it's kind of this like shocking or countercultural idea. But again, when I look at Jesus, like so much of his time is not standing in some place calling everybody over. It's him going physically to where they are,
Mm.
including places where like his people have oppressed the people there when he goes to Samaria, right? When he interacts with people, he's going into even uncomfortable places for him
Mm.
because there are people there he cares about. And so, I don't think it should be controversial to say Christians should show up in bars. I don't think it should be controversial, with a clear purpose, of course, but I don't think should be controversial for us to be in places that are not religious or anti-religious. I think we have this comfort zone mentality where God's really asking us to say, like, you be the vulnerable person. You be the person who doesn't have to have all the answers, who, maybe is like not the expert now. And you show up to contribute to somebody else's life. You show up to be a presence of relief for them.
Mm.
So that's been the most surprising thing is maybe how little interest there is in that,
Mm.
or maybe we're also just not super educated in that mindset. But I think that it's supposed to be what we're like most of the time. I think it's the calling of the Christian
Mm.
to be involved in people's lives in a way where they're relieved we're around.
Mm. So it sounds like many times we in Adventism have a culture of reaching people a certain way, and that tends to
Yep.
be through a big event, whether it's um, an evangelistic series or an event where people stream through the doors, and there used to be a time when that was very, very common in every single church,
Hmm.
and that was the mode of reaching people. Um, I think we have a culture of that, um, but not so much a culture of what you're talking about of every member taking some initiative to have conversations with people who don't believe like they do. It seems
Yeah.
like I don't know if you're I should say you're way younger than I am, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but when I was growing up, there was a thing where you showed up in Sabbath school, and not only did you
Hmm.
just show up to Sabbath school and discuss the Sabbath school
Hmm.
right before they did a roll call. And did you
Yep.
ever hear about what they used to do? They used to ask every single person who was sitting there, they used to ask them a few questions, right? They used to say, how many contacts for Jesus did you have? How many pieces of literature did you distribute? Right? How many
Sure.
it was accountability. It was
Hmm.
basically every single member knew that when they came to
Hmm.
Sabbath school that they would be asked how their interactions in between Sabbaths were actually going. Do you remember that? Can you believe that? It's
We
crazy.
we had versions of that. I mean, yeah, and there's places that are tracking down to people's technical tithe numbers. I mean, there's we fell into a very program heavy controlling kind of culture
Hmm.
for a while for sure,
Hmm.
and that the effects of that are still here.
Yeah. So I see that in a couple of different ways. I see that, whoa, that's pretty invasive. Like by today's standards, that'd be
Hmm.
very invasive. Wait, you're gonna ask me about my time, like what I did with my personal time, like publicly, and everyone's gonna be able to, critique
Yeah.
it. And on the other hand, I think that the one component of that that was healthy is that there was an understanding that every single member had to
Sure.
contribute to the kingdom of God, to growing the kingdom of God out in the world, not just
Hmm.
during worship. So it sounds to me like that component is a significantly is lacking in a significant way. So how
Yeah.
can we get back into that? And it sounds like what you're saying is for people who are disconnected are craving that in some way. Is that what you mean?
Well, we got to be careful. I mean, I think if you ask the average person who has left the church and disconnected that, do you want a bunch of Adventists coming after you, knocking on your door? They're going to say no, right? If you ask them, do you wish that there are people that you trusted in the church up the street? Do you wish that you had more people that could pick you up from the airport? Or if your kid got sick or needed picked up from school, that you could for sure know you wanted them to. I think that's the metric that I would use, is instead of how many people are showing up on Sabbath because you asked them to, I would ask how many people are you the person that they would call, right? I measure it for myself by the amount of college students that come and ask if they can come hang out in the communication offices in the summer. We have too many. Like they want to be around us. At camp meeting, I have students genuinely saying, "Hey, can we just come hang out? Can we come make a video? Can we contribute? We have a better time with you than we do at home." And to me, that's so powerful because this is such a critical point in their life. I'm not leading a song service. I'm not leading a Bible study with them. I'm just saying, hey, you're always welcome. If you want to talk through your recent breakup, we'll take the time. If you want to talk out work stuff, if you want pictures for your job, if you want advice on your resume, if you want to meet somebody else in this field, we'll arrange that. But, is there just a way that we can be that presence for them that's a stability and safety and relief and fun if we can, and I think that should be, our homes. I think that should be our, our Wednesday nights. I think that should be just built into our lives, where you're measuring, like, how many people around me look to me and say, that's the person that they're for me,
Yeah.
they're for me.
And so you're talking about some really practical, relational kind of components. You're not talking about, am I capable of teaching a Bible study? Am I capable of preaching a sermon? Like,
Right.
so many times we hear that from church members. It's like, hey, I don't know how to give a Bible study. I don't want to go door to door.
Sure.
But what you're talking about are things that are surprisingly simple and relational that just about anybody can do, right?
Yeah. And the Bible study, it's interesting how many conversations about God and the Bible that I end up in. Here in, secular Portland, Oregon, I end up talking about God with people almost every day. Because when you say you're a Seventh-day Adventist in Portland, Oregon, first of all, most people haven't heard of that. Second of all, they're like, what is that? And third of all, they're going to assume, oh, you're against me, right? You're a person that I can't trust. And if you're very open, you're just like, well, I'm not here to convince you. Here's why I believe what I believe. Here's why I care about that. And, I can't tell you how many times I've said, like, well, what do you care about? Oh, I care about animal cruelty. I care about, taking care of the planet. I care about work-life balance. I care about, all these things. I'm like, that's all the same things I care about. I just think there's a God who cares too. And it's not this big argument. It's not this, battle of the Bible verses.
Right.
It's just that urge that you have for healing and hope. There's a being behind that. And I just believe that it came from somewhere.
So, so many times Adventists and Christians in general, they feel like when it comes to winning people in the gospel, that it's got to be a home run, that they gotta prove it, and as long as we can prove it, we're gonna win this person into the church. But when it comes to matters of faith, isn't it just walking alongside people sharing faith, supporting each other. It's very gradual, isn't it? It's not just one big
I think
event
so.
where they're going to quote unquote make a decision for Christ. That doesn't happen overnight, does it?
I think that's part of why we're in the situation we are. We've favored immediate results over long-term discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
Immediate results come from, I mean, the easiest way to get somebody, and I know this from the marketing world as well, and this is part of why our news cycle is the way it is to make somebody upset and scared. If you can make them upset and scared, you can convince them of a lot of different things. And so, why has evangelism worked the way that it has for a long time? Well, because it's a quick way to get baptisms. It's a quick way to get somebody in the door. It's a quick way to get them to agree to change something in their life. And for some people, long term, that's the wake up call that's helped them over time, right? I'm not trying to villainize it, but overall, you have a lot more people leaving and becoming disillusioned when they've been scared into it rather than I genuinely trust the people here. And so for me personally, if I have to answer to God someday about my involvement in the world, I would much rather say, hey, I walked alongside these people no matter what, through addiction, through depression, through job loss, through anything, self-harm, anything at all, I was there. And for their whole life, I'm committed, and I was just going to be what I saw in you to them. I'm very confident that a God of love can accept that answer. What I'm not confident in is, hey, I held a big series and I talked people into signing this card and sitting in this seat and paying this money, right? Those can all be beautiful effects of that heart change and involvement. But until that person-to-person spiritual connection, long-term investment in somebody's life happens, the rest is kind of the shell without the spirit inside. And so I would much rather be that spirit inside. I would much rather be that, example of Jesus, person by person by person by person, and see what happens from there.
Yeah, Jesus was saying, when they were asking him about who's going to be entering the kingdom, he said, for I was hungry and you fed me, right? For I was naked and you gave me some clothes. Like I was hungry, I was in prison. It's surprising that Jesus doesn't point to, well, I taught people to believe and to do the right things, right? He's speaking about meeting needs that are not quote unquote so overtly theological. It is just like you said, walking alongside people. So as we wrap up, you've given us some pretty tangible things to kind of reflect on about how we can connect with the disconnected. And as we kind of wrap up, if you're thinking about pastors or ministry leaders and they're like, okay, so sometimes we tend to be in echo chambers and we just kind of speak to the flock, so to speak. But if somebody's saying, you know what, how can I be more intentional in ministry or in my personal life about connecting with the disconnected, or just to connect with somebody new, how would you summarize that?
Yeah, I'd say a couple things. Number one, most people think they're good listeners, and most people aren't. Especially for pastors who are used to being trusted as an authority. They're used to being looked to say things. Getting to know people, you have to take the complete inverse of that approach. You make it about them. You ask about them. You show up for them. You think about everything that you do from their perspective on you, right? And how you affect them. Any way that you would make them feel unsafe, right? Any of that. I think that's the starting point. But I think also pastors are constantly having to choose between the politics of their job and the individual in front of them. And that's a really hard place to be. Sometimes your church doesn't want you to do what you need to do. Sometimes your bosses and your organization don't want you to do what you really need to do. And I think having a little bravery, I think following, being willing to, be criticized, being willing to answer for things that you do on behalf of other people. I think that courageous pastors over time earn the trust of their communities better, and be willing to ask, the people that are from the polar opposite approach to theology, the polar opposite approach to politics, look behind what they're saying, look behind all of that anger and all of those problems and things. And there's usually some kind of pain or trauma or lack of education that's kind of pushing those things out, and really try to address the root of those things. So, if somebody's insecure, if somebody's afraid, if somebody's been through trauma, go straight for those instead of kind of arguing on that surface level stuff.
To get to the deeper kind of personal components of what's happening in their lives, right?
Yep.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. All of these things that we're talking about take time, but they're a worthy investment. And I can't think of a better example right now is to see the journey that you have taken and the intentional relational approach that was taken in your life to bring you to this point where you're now trying to help and contribute to this conversation of how to connect with the disconnected. For those who haven't heard about your podcast, what is it called once again? Where can they find it?
Sure. It's called Bridges Over Walls. You can find it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube.
It's an amazing,
and also on Instagram.
A really, really, really great podcast. You'll see some great, very thoughtful interviews. Kaleb Eisele from the Oregon Conference. Thank you so much for being with us, for sharing of your time, for helping us to understand how we can kind of connect more relationally with others as we reflect on ministry and our personal conversations. Thank you so much for spending time with us. We can't wait to do this again. And blessings to you as you continue to connect with people in meaningful ways.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you for listening here at the Ministry Path podcast. We can't wait to see you at the next episode. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you soon.